Okay, now we are ready to go again. Today we are continuing on through Chapter 6, our Communications chapter. Last time I believe we got most of the way through Section 6.1, all the way through 6.1 I suppose. And today we want to learn about how to put together how to organize. Again, we got most of the way through 6.1, not all the way. We want to learn how to organize a paper of some kind. We looked at all kinds of engineering papers, technical papers, and other things. Now what we want to do is we really want to look at how do we build one. We're not going to go into great detail, but we are going to see some things here. So let's take a look at our PC. Put it up on the screen here for everybody. Long thing. Try this one. Okay. So they actually have a different list of different ways you can organize things. Let's take a look at that list really quick, just to give us a little jumping off point. So I'm going to switch over to our dock camera, I suppose. This is on page 149. It's a useful little list of ways to organize the structure of some kind of paper, some kind of article, some kind of whatever you're doing. It even works for things like patents and other things like that. The first thing on the list is chronological. A chronological strategy gives a historical account of the topic. This works when you have, when the time scale is important to what you're writing about. So for example, if you're going through a project, if you're writing a paper or a patent or a communication of some kind about a project that you've been doing, that has taken you 5 years, and each month in that year you did something on the project that furthered the project along, that furthered the design along, or whatever else, then it makes a lot of sense to use a chronological strategy. To start from the beginning, we'll go through, month by month and show you what we did, kind of thing. It also really works for things that are built up from a foundation, quite literally, right? So buildings, roads, things like that, it's really good to start in a chronological order. What's the first thing we do? What's the second thing we do? What's the third thing we do? However, not everything works best that way. Sometimes you can use a different strategy for organizing your information, for organizing your paper or your presentation, whatever it is. And other different types of organization are spatial strategy. That's the second one here. Spatial strategy describes something from the point of view of where things are, not when they happened, but where they happened. So oftentimes you have a project that has different layers or different levels or different areas, or it's happening in different places, and so you want to look at it from different spaces. Let's look at this. Let's look at the lowest layer or the top layer or the middle layer first, and then we'll move on to other layers. And sometimes it makes sense that way, just logically speaking, and so you go ahead and use that strategy. Sometimes you organize something on the approach of a debate, right? So oftentimes there's two different sides to an issue, two different sides to design, two different reasons for doing something, or something like this, or maybe more than two. And you're going to discuss those things. You're going to compare and contrast. You're going to do pros and cons, and that often works out in engineering as well. You may be building, for example, a catapult, like we might do here, and you want to debate whether it's better to build it out of metal or out of wood. So You talk about all the good things about wood and maybe some of the drawbacks, and you talk about the bad things about metal and some of its advantages, and you compare those and contrast them, and you go through your presentation that way. You can also do what they call a general to specific strategy, which is the fourth one here, where you start off talking about very broad issues, and then you focus it into a very specific issue. So, for example, you're talking about earthquakes, and you talk about earthquake safety, and then you talk about earthquake building design, and then you talk about structural changes since earthquakes have been happening in California. And then you specifically talk about a particular type of I-beam structure that's used in a particular building in this particular part of California that has these particular kind of earthquakes. And you start really, really broad, just talking about earthquakes, and focus it down to a point that gets to exactly what you're talking about. And sometimes that is really important because the audience that you're speaking to, the audience you're writing to, needs that background information. They really need to understand why you're doing this. That's a really huge strategy. People use that all the time. Engineers use it all the time, especially when they're trying to write a paper or a presentation for a group of investors or a group of politicians or a group of the general public, people who don't have engineering skills or understanding, but they still need to hear what you have to say because you're developing something that they're going to use or they're going to pay for or they're going to vote for or whatever else. Then they have this problem to solution strategy. That's kind of like going through the engineering process. We have this problem, this question that needs to be answered. Here are the things that we went through to get it done, to understand it, to fix it, right? That's kind of just like going through those steps of that process, the design process. And then a motivational strategy, and this is essentially used by people who are trying to sell a project or sell a product of some kind, right? And so you're going to try to convince people, motivate them to do what you want them to do. Motivational strategies are not necessarily the most straightforward engineering strategies, but it's often used. So sometimes you're guiding them along a little bit more than anything else. So those are the different strategies that you can have for organizing a paper. But how do you actually organize it? There are lots of different ways to organize it, but in my opinion and my experience, there's really only one way that works really well. And it's the outline. And people say, oh, I hate outlines. But it is an extremely powerful and extremely useful method for organizing a paper, is using the outline method. What do you do when you use the outline method? Well, you can do all kinds of different things. There's so many different possibilities for outlining a paper. It doesn't really matter which one you use, but you should use one, and you should also keep it around until you're done with your paper. You shouldn't just use an outline to start and then go write your paper. Now I'm going to go ahead and look here, and I'm going to look at outlining a paper. Right? You're going to see lots of different paper outlines here. Most of them are going to be very similar to each other. I'm going to look for one that's maybe a little bit different. See if I can find a different one here. Here's an interesting one to do. Let's take a look at this one. How to outline a paper, right? I like this because this shows what you're actually doing when you're trying to figure out how to write a paper or how to put together a presentation. And this actually goes from the general to specific approach. This is using the general to specific strategy, where you start off with an introduction, background information, general information. You're starting out fairly broad, and then you start focusing things by giving more information that is specific, and then you get even more specific, more details, and then at the end, you're just wrapping up exactly what you wanted to say. This last couple of sentences, last paragraph maybe, is just stating the whole purpose of your paper so that somebody can come in and look at your paper and read the last paragraph and just understand what you were writing about, right? They understand what the point was you were trying to make. They may not understand all the stuff that you used to make the point, because that's all back here. But they should understand what you were trying to get at just by reading those last couple sentences of your paper. Some teachers use an hourglass approach where you go from general to specific back to general. I would not do that in engineering. I would go general to specific if you're going to do this kind of an approach. You want the last things that you say in your paper to be the whole purpose of your paper, the whole purpose of your presentation. You have your paragraph, outlining, lots of different, and there's so many different ways to do this. Here's another way to base a basic outline here. You have your topic sentence, your supporting sentences, your ending sentence. You've all seen this before. The paragraph burger, right? Whatever. There's just so many different ways to think about this. In the end, what you want to do is you want to put down some information that goes along with that outline. And that's generally going to look like something like this. Okay? So let's take a look at this one. This one is how to write a master's thesis in something or another. In computer programming, it looks like. But it's the same everywhere. You're going to have some chapters or some paragraphs, however you want to think about it. Most of the stuff that you're going to do for the next few years are going to be paragraphs, not chapters. But you're going to have a first one that's going to involve an introduction. And you're going to do some specific things in the introduction. Maybe you're going to state the problem. Maybe you're going to have to tell people some important terms that you're going to be using in this paper that are not terms normally used. In engineering, that's very common because different engineering fields use different terms for different things. So maybe you have to tell people that when I'm talking about an I-beam, I'm talking about a particular type of steel that's a particular shape, that has a particular weight to strength ratio, whatever else. So that when you use that term again, everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. They don't have to ask the question. Maybe in here you're going to review some literature that is important to your field. So for example, maybe there's a book or somebody else's paper that's about this subject that you've used to describe the stuff you're doing. And then you're going to, in this opening part, you're also going to describe what else you're going to be talking about in the paper. So you may be saying that we're going to be building a catapult, and we use these websites and this book to learn about catapults. And there's different things like the arm and the pivot, and this is what they mean. That's my definition of terms. And then the description of the remaining chapters, I would say, in this paper, I will describe our process for choosing the type of catapult we were going to build. I will describe the process that we used to design our catapult. I will describe the process that we used to build our catapult, and I will describe the process that we used to test and to modify our catapult. And that tells the reader that you have 4 or 5 paragraphs coming, and maybe some lists of times and dates and materials and designs and other things. They're going to know what's coming at them. And I know that in English sometimes they say, don't just list things like that because, you don't want it to be so banal, so boring. We want to surprise them a little bit. We don't want to surprise people in engineering. We want to inform them. Surprising people is not informing, it's just surprising. And so we don't want to do stuff like that. Then the rest of your paragraphs are going to be addressing those issues that you've laid out in this first introduction paragraph. And at the very end, you're going to say something like, we built this type of a catapult using these materials that cost us this much, we had this kind of success, and we were able to do this with it. And that's it. At the end, you're essentially summing up the success or the failure or the results or whatever. And it's maybe just a couple, 3 sentences to figure it out. And then maybe at the end of it, you're going to have some things that they're going to need. Maybe you're going to have some drawings in an appendix. These are the drawings of my thing. And in engineering, you don't always put drawings and graphs and charts inside your paper. You often put them at the end of the paper as an appendix. And so you always often have these appendices tacked onto the end. So papers, presentations, no matter what you're doing, if you're communicating in more than a single page to somebody, and sometimes even if it's just a page, you want to outline it first, and you really want to write it down. And here this is basic stuff, but you would put more specific stuff. So let's go look at a specific outline for somebody's paper. Let's see, that's specific. looking for a better one here. Let's look for a better one. That's also very general. Let's look at a specific paper that somebody did here. Okay, so here is here's an outline. I don't know what this looks like, a training outline for somebody. That's fine. This will work just fine. So let's take a look at it. So it looks like here they're talking about museums and monuments, historic sites, and things inside of Indianapolis, right? And this is for probably for training people to teach people what's available in the city of Indianapolis. And that's great, because you can see here that there's 3 different things that they're trying to cover: museums and monuments, historic sites, and stuff that's just for kids. Under museums and monuments, they have the Indianapolis Museum of Art, the Indiana State Museum, the Ida York Museum of American Indians, the Indy Motor Speedway, the Indiana Soldiers and Sailors Monument, the World War Memorial. And then here they have 2 sub-things that are here, 2 things that they want to remember to include: the centerpiece of the 5-block plaza, and to vindicate the principles of peace and justice in the world. These are things that they want people to remember about that particular memorial. And in the Veterans Memorial Plaza, it's the same thing when you are outlining a paper. You put in the important stuff, and it doesn't necessarily have to be numbered. It can just be a list with bullets like this, or it can be numbered in order of time or importance or whatever, if you want to number it. But you need to include the important stuff under this heading. And then when you come back to write it, you'll turn these things into sentence. Not necessarily one sentence for every one of these things. You may be able to combine 2 of them. Maybe these 2 museums are on the south side of town, these 2 museums are on the west side of town, these are on the east side of town. So for each side of town, you include one sentence. You say, well, on the south side of town, with the Indianapolis Museum of Art and the Indiana State Museum. And on the north side of town, so on and so forth. And then when you get down to this part, where you have these individual things that you want to remember, then you devote an entire sentence. At the World War Memorial, we have a 5-block plaza that is the centerpiece of the memorial to vindicate the principles of peace and justice in the world. And you can just throw that phrase right in there. And you can maybe even say, that's a quote from whoever designed this monument or this memorial. And then you go on to the other things. And you build those things into sentences. And then are you done? No. Then you go back and you meld them together. You make the sentences better, you rearrange them, you rewrite them, you include other information maybe that you forgot to include so far, or you cut out stuff that you think is excessive, and so on and so forth, and you turn it into a beautiful rendition of pure information, right? And no extra crap and stuff like that. But anyway, same thing you would do for going through historical sites or anything else. Any kind of outline is essentially just your blueprint for building on. You build your sentences on top of it. And it's a very useful tool. You will use this tool in your English classes and in other classes, history and whatever else, social studies, whatever class it is that you're writing in, and they teach you to do this. Learn it. Because it's much easier to learn it in high school and get used to it than it is to learn it in college when you're trying to keep up with everybody else who already knows it. Trust me, because I didn't learn it. When I was writing in junior high school and high school, I was a good writer. I could sit down and write a paper without even thinking. I would write the whole thing from beginning to end, and I wouldn't change a thing. I'd just be done. And I'd get good grades. And I tried to do that in college, and I got hammered. I got a terrible grade on my first papers in college. And I had to learn how to write. I spent a lot of extra hours with my professors learning how to put together an organization that worked before I got started. And you can spend a lot of time switching things around. And the great thing about computers is that you can you can put this together in Microsoft Word and it'll do it for you automatically. Let's take a look at how that's done. So let's open up a new blank document here, and let's just start. I'm going to do an outline And I'm going to just make this up as I go. It's not that hard to do because when you're first starting a paper, you are kind of making it up as you go. And doing an outline like that is fine because an outline is all about just figuring out what you may want to put in the paper, not what's going to be there, but what you may want to be there. So let's say that I'm going to design a robot. I'm going to start up here with my title, designing a robot that will clean, and I don't even worry about spelling too much on these things or anything else. See, I've got a robot in there, so I'm going to change that really quick just because I want to, but I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'm just going to go. So design a robot that will clean my room. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to put a capital I here for my first thing. And the great thing about that is that when I do that in Microsoft Word, it automatically takes you into outline mode so that you don't have to worry about it. If I want to put in another section, If I want to put in another section, let's say that I put in my introduction to robotics here. I can't spell robotics. Introduction to robotics here, and I hit enter, it automatically puts a new heading in there, which is great because you don't have to worry about the formatting. It just does it automatically for you. And also, if I put in this new format and I hit a tab, it puts in an A. So this tells me if I put in a new number 2, like the Roman numeral 2, that means I'm going to the next paragraph. But A tells me I'm still in the introduction paragraph. So I go down here, introduction to robots, and let's say robots. Let's start off with working robots, robots that do work, right, in history. And we could even go in one more thing and say, well, I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about fiction robots, like in movies and stuff, and that's in caps lock, I don't want that to be. And I'm going to talk about non-fiction stuff, like real robots, right? And maybe I know for a fact that in my fiction one, I want to talk about I, Robot by, what was his name?
Isaac Asimov.
Asimov, thank you. Asimov. So I want to talk about I, Robot by Isaac Asimov because he was a great, not only a great author, but he was also a great scientist. He was a chemist at Chicago University, I think, or Boston University, one of the two. Anyway, so I talk about that fiction, non-fiction, and if I go down to this third one, I don't want to talk about robots in history anymore. I just want to talk about something else. And so I go down to this number 3 here, and I hit Shift and Tab, and it takes me back to B. So the second thing I'm talking about in my introduction is going to be, I'm going to talk about robots today, maybe, and then maybe the third thing I'm going to talk about is homemade robots, because I want to make one myself, right? And that's all I want to talk about, robots. But the last thing I'm going to talk about is what I'm going to talk about in this paper, right? So I'm being very general. I don't know what I'm going to talk about, but maybe I know something. Maybe I'm going to talk about the processor I'm going to use that's going to control the robot. Maybe I'm going to talk about the parts, the kinetic parts, the moving parts. Kinetic components, right? Maybe I'm going to talk about the servos. Maybe I'm going to talk about the sensors. And maybe not in this order. Maybe I don't know if I want to talk about them in this order, so maybe I change this list here to a bulleted list because I'm not sure about the order, so I just change that to a bulleted list. And then I go down here and I'm going to go back to B, back to 2, and this is going to be my new paragraph because those are the things I'm going to talk about. And I'm ready to talk about my first paragraph. My first paragraph, I already told you what it's going to be. It's going to be processors. Or maybe it's going to be kinetic components or servers or sensors. So maybe I'm going to start with the processor because since I control the whole robot, it makes sense to talk about that first. And I go, my first paragraph is going to be the processor, but maybe I'm going to talk about a specific processor. The Lego Next LabVIEW processor, right? So that's a specific type of robotic processor program that you can use and chip that you can use. And down here under this, I'm going to talk about some specific things. I'm going to talk about the actual processor. I'm going to talk about programming the processor. So maybe the processor, and notice I'm not putting a lot of details in here, but I'm putting enough to know what I want to talk about. Programming the chip, right? Connecting to servos, and connecting, maybe you call it integrating. Integrating with sensors, right? This kind of thing. So this now is a paragraph. It's got 4 sentences here, maybe more. Maybe programming the chip was going to take 2 or 3 sentences. And we go on and on and on. Maybe in the middle of this thing I decide that programming the chip and talking about the chip and programming the chip need to be one paragraph, and connecting the servos and integrating the sensors needs to be another paragraph, because it's just getting too long. You get up to about 10 sentences and you're way too long for a single paragraph. You need to maybe split it into 2 paragraphs. And so maybe I decide that because I've looked at this thing and I've seen how much I put into this, I can start to see how long my paper is going to be, how I'm going to divide it up, how I'm going to organize it. And look at this. Already I've got my introduction paragraph and my opening paragraph, and I haven't even done anything about this project. I'm just making this up off the top of my head. I've never even done a robotics project for real in my life. That's true. I never have. It's just from stuff that I've learned and read and other things. Because maybe before I started this paper, I went out and started doing some research. I was looking at things. I was playing around with ideas on the internet or whatever. Organizing a paper is extremely important, because without this, your paper will be all over the place. You won't have structure that makes sense, and you won't know where you're going. That's the biggest problem. You yourself, the writer, will not know where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, I guarantee you the reader won't know where you're going. This takes time. It absolutely does. And it will make the paper writing process, the presentation writing process, much longer. But it will be much better for it. And also, in the end, it'll actually make it shorter when you have to go back and rewrite, because whoever you're doing this for is telling you to rewrite it because it stinks, right? When you write it up as an outline, fixing your problems, fixing your mistakes, fixing the stinkiness of your presentation is much easier to do. So that's something that I want to get across to you. I want you to remember, when you're writing, you're not just trying to satisfy some English teacher or some social studies teacher's requirements for writing paper. You're trying to learn how to organize your thoughts and to present them in such a way that they're easily understandable. Now, in the homework, they give you a whole bunch of things to rewrite. And they don't really talk about it in great detail in well, I guess they do. They do talk about it in great detail here at the end of chapter 6 at 6.3. So we'll do that one later. 6.3, they talk a lot about all kinds of things concerning writing, including organization, which I just talked about. But I talked about organization early because giving presentations to people requires the same kind of organization, so you need to understand that. What I mean by presentation is that you're going to stand up and you're going to talk to people, and you're going to explain things to people, and you're going to walk them through some kind of presentation that you have prepared and you have organized for them. And we're going to watch a video here for the last few minutes of bad ways to present. Now, since you're in high school, I'm going to assume that you've worked with PowerPoint. Probably started working with it in junior high school. But I'm also going to assume that most of the stuff you learned is probably pretty useless. I'm only making that assumption because I've watched my kids learn PowerPoint from their instructors in junior high school and high school, And most of the stuff they learned was pretty useless. They learned how to change the font, change the background, put in pictures, put in videos, animate all kinds of garbage. They learned, in other words, how to play with PowerPoint, not how to use PowerPoint. And why do I think all that is useless? It's really quite simple. It's because it is. Let's take a look at why it's useless. Let's go to our favorite place for watching things, YouTube. Can't get there for some reason. And let's look at this guy right here, Don McMillan. Don McMillan is a PowerPoint expert. He's a presentation expert, but he's also a comedian. And what he does here in this video is he gives a presentation on how not to give a presentation. And it's extremely useful. I mean, it's about 9 minutes long, but we're going to take about 20 minutes to go through it because I'm going to stop it every once in a while. It's called Death by PowerPoint. I'll turn up the volume the best I can so you can all hear it. Let's see what we get here. Let's hear.
People all the time, this is how we communicate in today's world, okay? This is what we don't want. This is typically called life or death by PowerPoint, right? We've all...
Okay, so first slide, death by PowerPoint. Why does he say this is terrible? Why is this death? And why is this such a good example? Bill Gates was the prime example of giving bad presentations to people. He gave PowerPoint lectures that had slides like this, that had pictures with a million different things on it all the time. It's just too much information. You can't possibly understand anything that's up there on that screen. It's too much junk. Let's see what he does with it.
Well, we think in PowerPoint now. This is a true story. I was driving through Colorado a couple years ago. I hit a patch of ice on I-70 coming out of the Eisenhower Tunnel, going like, 65, 70, maybe 90 miles an hour. And I started spinning at top speed, and my life flashed before my eyes, and I swear to you, it was in PowerPoint. And how bad has PowerPoint got? This is actually the number of PowerPoint presentations per day. Look at that. It's 43 million per day in 2007, 54 million in 2008, 69 million this year, 88 million per day next year. Now, I looked at this chart. Look, that is growing, exponentially. I looked at this chart. Here's home foreclosures per year. You see, that's growing about the same way. I realized that PowerPoint actually caused the mortgage meltdown.
Now, it seems like it's just funny, but this happens all the time in presentations as well. People actually they put up charts that are maybe interesting, maybe not, and then they put up unrelated charts on the same slide. Why would they? Well, in this case, he's making a joke. But people do it. They do it because they think it looks nice, or they're trying to save space. Waste of time.
So this is a thing I do called Life After Death by PowerPoint. Basically, don't do these things with PowerPoint. These are the things that people do that drive me nuts. And the only way to show them not to do this is to show them what not to do. So the biggest one I see, the most common PowerPoint thing, number one, people tend to put every word they're going to say on their PowerPoint slide. Although this eliminates the need to memorize, you're told, ultimately makes your slides crowded, wordy, and boring. You lose your audience attention before you even reach the bottom of your first slide. Now,
nobody wants to hear you read something, especially if you put it on the wall for them to read. And they don't want to read it either. People don't come to an oral presentation to listen to people read. It's almost as boring as watching people do math, right?
Second most common, font size is important. Size matters. Too small, and that's not good for anybody. On the other hand, too big, and you look like a moron. You just look like an idiot. Don't have your fonts moving. Keep your text stationary.
This is the one that drives me crazy. Every single teacher of PowerPoint in high school that I've ever heard of teaches their students to do this. But why? It's so dumb.
There's nothing more annoying than text that does it. Blinking, don't have it blinking, don't have it spinning, don't have stuff flying around the screen. You drive people with ADD crazy. They're just like, oh, what's happening? Oh. Now, since I'm talking about fonts, people are really into fonts. I've noticed this. Here's a great, by the way, this is one of the best jokes that I know. Comic Sans and Helvetica walk into a bar. And ask the bartender for a drink, and the bartender says, sorry, we don't serve your type here. That kills at a font convection, guy. Oh, that's a good one. It's a type. I get it. The font you choose, be very careful. Everybody has their favorite font. The font you choose sends a message about who you are as a person. There's a long list of fonts. We pick one. That reflects our personality. We're sending an unspoken message. So, for example, if you choose Carrier New, it means you're organized and structured. And like to pretend you're still using a typewriter. If you choose Comic Sans, it means you think you're funny. And if you choose Times New Roman, it means you're lazy, apathetic, and unimaginative, and you always use the default.
Which is kind of interesting. There's a reason that Times New Roman is the default in Microsoft Word, for example. It's because it is by far the easiest font to read. So if you're writing a paper on paper, and you're going to print it off and give it to a teacher, and you want them to not get a headache reading it, you want them to be able to read your writing easily, use Times New Roman. It's a joke here that you're lazy, apathetic, and you're unimaginative, so you always use the default. But it's actually the easiest font to read because of its serifs. The way that it's written, the way that it's designed, is extremely good for reading. The people, I was the same way when I was in high school. I loved to pick the font that looked the most professional, or looked the most modern, or something else. Waste of time. Because if you give your teacher a headache while they're reading the paper, you're going to get a bad grade, or a worse grade than you would have. Use Times New Roman when you're writing a paper. When you're doing a presentation, do not. Because you're going to use a larger font, and you're going to use something without a serif, something that looks more clean than Times New Roman does.
If you choose Georgia, it means you speak with a southern accent. If you choose Ariel, it means you like The Little Mermaid. Oh, a lot of Ariel people. If you choose Old English, it means you enjoy malt liquor. You know this. You know this. We got a few more. Helvetica, that means you're a mayonnaise lover. That's a stretch. I'll admit that is a stretch. Blackadder, that means you're an African-American accountant. That one requires some thought. Sorry. And if you like wingdings, it means you're a nerd and you have no life. Now, if you type in all small letters, some people do that, all small letters, that means you're quiet, shy, and unassertive. If you type in all capital letters, that means you yell a lot. There's somebody over there. If you type a small letter followed by capital letters, it means your cap lock is stock on. Don't you hate when that happens? Usually going along for a while, you look up, oh, darn! And then finally, if you have a mix of capital letters and small letters, that means this is a ransom note and you are a kidnapper. Very hard to do, by the way. It's the fourth most common PowerPoint mistake. Avoid excessive bullet pointing, only bullet key points. Too many bullet points, and your key messages will not stand out. In fact, the term bullet point comes from people firing guns at annoying presenters.
People are in love with making lists. If you're going to make a list, make sure it's an important list.
This slide, by the way, has crashed PowerPoint. Apparently, there's a max about how many bullet points you can have, and I said, I pressed it. The other thing you can do is have animations. People love animations. They have stuff go zooming in and out and left and right. You get seasick watching some of these. And it turns out if you're a visual learner, your effectiveness as a speaker will go up with more animations. But if they're easily distracted, they are not even paying attention to what you're saying. They're just watching the cool stuff. And there's regions to this graph. There's the simple but effective region, the active but confusing, the effective but boring, the active but ineffective, the dull but static region, the busy but useless region over there, the ADD only region there up in the corner, the useful amusing, the stupid confusing, the dull triangle, the hyper triangle, the sleepy square, the dizzying pentagon, and then everything else is just grouped into what's called pointless motion. This one slide, by the way, took me 3.5 weeks to make. Sure, PowerPoint can suck the life out of you. Now, one of the biggest dangers today, and I'm telling you, I hear it more and more every time I hear a conversation, is what I call SAOD, or severe acronym overload disorder. Have you heard people talk recently? There are no words going between, yeah, I am my CFO about our ROI and our CRM and our RRP, and it turns out our EPS is really SOL, so we better do something ASAP. Like, can I buy a vowel? I can't solve your conversation. And I made up this resume, but this could be a real resume in today's world. Look, I got an MBA from USC, an MSEE from MIT, a BSEE from DU. I worked at IBM, HP, VLSI. I remember IEEE, EIT, NCAA, NAACP, RPA, AAA. I want a position as CEO, COO, CFO, CIO, CTO, CMO, CSO, CPO, CYO, VP, EVP, or EIEIO. I want to be the EIEIO of a company someday. That's actually my dream. Hi, I'm the EIEIO. Nice to meet you. Call me Old McDonald. That's all. Now, kind of my final point, and this people do all the time. They'll just have graph after graph just to impress you with their graph prowess. And I chose acronym usage. This is my real-time acronym usage. It pretty much goes up and down. I don't know why you need the graph, but you can see pretty much peak there. I'll use some more acronyms later. And there's just a chart that doesn't make any sense to you, but I just want to impress you. Here's an acronym letter distribution. C's, I's, E's, N's, and S's are the most common letters that I use in my acronyms. Here's a pie chart letter distribution. And here's, I have no idea what you use that for, but you can generate that automatically in PowerPoint. So I figured what the heck I did. Here's a line graph, the number of line graphs throughout my show. Here's a...
So the great thing about this is he's essentially just showing you that you shouldn't use PowerPoint just because you can. You shouldn't do things in PowerPoint just because you can. You shouldn't build things in PowerPoint just because you can. PowerPoint is a tool. It's like a hammer. When you're building a house, you don't go around hitting things in the house with the hammer just because you can. You don't just, hit the windows with the hammer and the floors with the hammer. You nail things with the hammer. When you're done using the hammer, you put it away. Use the hammer for what you need it for and nothing else. And really, what PowerPoint is for is to back up the things that you say. It's to give a visual representation of things that you're explaining. It's to show a picture that you maybe need to show to describe things. And so at this point, for the last 5 minutes, I'm going to go and look at
bar chart number bar.
One of the best presenters, I think, of all time. And that would be Steve Jobs. Now, I know everybody has an opinion about Apple Computer and Steve Jobs and everything else versus whoever else. Doesn't really matter who else. But I don't think that anybody can deny that when Steve Jobs gives a presentation, it is extremely easy to understand.
This is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years.
I want you to know something about him, first of all. He's at a conference with a bunch of computer programmers. Okay? This is a conference that goes every year in San Francisco, and it's just a bunch of computer nerds, essentially. So he's wearing jeans and a t-shirt, a little mock turtleneck t-shirt. But notice that it's black. Why? Why do you think it's black? Anybody have an idea? Go ahead, Tyler.
It's the same color as his background.
Because it doesn't distract from his background. The background of his presentation is also black.
Every once in a while,
Simple.
a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. And Apple has been, well, first of all, one's very fortunate if you get to work on just one of these in your career. Apple's been very fortunate. It's been able to introduce a few of these into the world. In 1984, we introduced the Macintosh. It didn't just change Apple. It changed the whole computer industry.
Okay, notice. How much information is on this screen? Almost none. He's got a date, and he's got a computer. Almost no information. But he's going to talk about it. Notice the pause.
In 2001,
he allows pauses
we
and time
introduced
to
the
pass.
first iPod. And it didn't just change the way we all listen to music. It changed the entire music industry. Well, today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls.
I'll go further on here.
And a breakthrough internet communications device.
So notice, so he's talking about the first iPhone, which was essentially the first smartphone, right? Notice that he's describing what this phone does. But he only has 3 things up there on it. He hasn't even shown the crowd what the phone looks like. They don't even know that it's a screen with no, dialing buttons or anything on it. It's just a screen. They don't know anything about it, but he's telling them what it can do. 3 basic things: iPod, phone, and internet. Right? Very simple slides. Now in engineering, we're not going to necessarily be so simplified. But you want to be as simple as you can be and still give the information that is necessary. You want to be somewhere between what he's doing and some of the crazy slides we saw in the previous thing. Enough information to give all that is needed, but it doesn't overload your audience. We'll talk a little bit more about this next time, and also a little bit more about some more communications. The last chapter 6.3, writing sentences so you can get your homework done. And we'll see you guys next time. We're all out of time. Have a good one.